Welcome to another exciting episode of the AI Powered Marketing Show. Today, we're diving into how AI and machine learning are reshaping marketing and business strategy. Joining us today is a true expert in the field. Surya Patchipala is Director of Consulting in Data, AI, and Machine Learning Engineering with nearly 14 years of experience in AI driven decision making. From designing high scale AI and machine language pipelines to ensuring data security and compliance, Surya has led transformative projects in mission critical industries. Today, he'll share insights on how businesses can leverage AI to enhance marketing, streamline operations, and stay ahead of the competition. Please join me in welcoming to the show Surya Patchipala. Everybody, Keith Bell here from the AI Powered Marketing Show. I want you to join me in welcoming to the show Surya. How are you, buddy?
Hey Keith, how are you? I'm doing great.
You have a really interesting background. So, what I want you to do is tell me a little bit about yourself so my audience can learn more about who you are.
Can certainly do that. So again, I do have overall 15 years of industry experience, especially in banking, dealing with data, AI, and ML engineering. So we build a application that serves critical banking application under the hood it works with terabytes, petabytes of data, responding to our customers' critical needs. Let it be loan processing, or it can be anything related to their product issues. So that's what we are trying to solve with innovative AI and ML under the hood.
Okay. Now, you are a data engineer by practice. Is that
Yes,
correct?
I started my career
Okay.
as a data engineer, and then I took different minute deviations into ML and AI engineering. But still, you can call me still a data engineer. Yep.
Okay. So, would you get? So, for somebody that's interested in going into data engineering, what kind of career path did you take college wise?
College wise, again, you can start with for any engineering field, right? Programming is a key in your career path. You can pick Python, you can pick Java, or you can pick the latest functional programming, Scala, right? That's where you start with, so that you get around this technology aspect of engineering. And then you have to understand analysis, how you approach the data in solving a problem. Well, the key for that is understand how traditional relational databases work, and then how it got transformed into the latest data lake, delta lake, right? So how data warehouses, right, are working in parallel with data lake and delta lake to support the customer needs, right? That's the journey people have to understand before they choose this path of data engineering. Yeah.
Okay. Did you? I saw somewhere you went. Did you go to Harvard? Harvard Business
Yes, I
School.
do have a business analytics certification from Harvard Business School. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I saw. I've been poking around in some of their free courses. They got some great free courses. Anybody out that's out there that's interested in taking a free course and getting a certification from the Harvard Business School, they got some paid courses too. I see some certifications there as well. But what the heck is a data engineer? I mean, I come from a law enforcement background, so educate me, the common man, as to what a data engineer does.
engineer who pre-processes, cleans, and then prepare the data for further enrichment and analytics, right? Is called data engineer. So let's take a deep dive into these. How do they uh, ingest the data, right? That's where, I mean, you have the data sitting somewhere in a system like RDBMS in Oracle, or it can be Teradata, right? So how do we bring that into your system, where you call it as data lake or data warehouse is your primary responsibility? And then once the data arrives, how do you enrich it, right? And when I say enrich it, you have this data point like customer demographics, and you wanted to understand their demographics along with their transactional behavior. So you have to take this data and then merge it with the transactional data so that you get more insights into the customer, which means you are enriching a customer detail, right? So that's analytics, or the data enrichment we are talking about. And then persisting the data. So once you do this, you are going to use this for reporting, or someone else would use it for their product. So you have to persist it somewhere. Understanding different databases of choice, like you have Hadoop based databases like Hive, and you have NoSQLs like MongoDB, HBase, Cassandra. So where do you persist it, why? And those are the persistent activities that data engineer would work on. Yeah.
Okay. So if I understand, like I'm going to use your example. You talked about, let's say you have customer data, like all their biographical data, age, gender, where they live, and then over here you have their purchasing history. As a data engineer, you would put them together, kind of merge them together, so that they're a comprehensive piece of data that then can be used elsewhere for another
Yeah.
purpose. So,
Maybe a purpose could be
it,
recommendation, right? You wanted to recommend certain products based on where they live demographically and then based on their spend pattern. So merging these two behaviors would definitely give you more insights in understanding what kind of products could you even suggest them. Yeah. Etc.
So, you're in the banking industry. So, do they use that as well, like to recommend products, financial service products for your customers?
Bank has many products, and a particular customer can use only certain products out of it, and it could be a win-win for both the bank and the customer, because if there are certain interesting products that benefit the customer, and if the customer takes that, if that benefits the finance or the banking client better, then it's a win-win. Yeah, of course. Yeah, banks does recommendation. They run the analytics to understand the customer behavior and then recommend products accordingly. Yeah.
Now, do you guys use predictive analytics and things like that?
Predictive analytics, yes. It's like you have a customer behavior, like a credits risk rating, let's say, and you see their risk rating for the past uh, few years worth of data. That's the time series. I mean, we call that as a time series data. And based on that, you wanted to predict how the customer risk rating could be this year or next year, how their spend can be. Yes, that's a kind of predictive analysis or predictive analytics with models under the hood, which does the work based on their historical behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked extensively on this show about how predictive analytics, especially from a marketing standpoint, because this show's about marketing. I interviewed an interesting guest probably last year. His name is Andrew Pearson. Andrew is a expert in predictive analytics, and he works for the Macau gaming industry in Macau, and I guess it's in Hong Kong or over in. But he sets up predictive models for gambling behavior, like the way that what potential risk a person may be to the casino with their gambling history. So we've talked a lot about predictive analytics. How much of a role does uh, data and a data engineer play in the development of these AI
You
platforms?
know what? Data is the key for majority of the models. It can be AI or ML. So as the saying goes, right, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you feed if you feed noisy data, if you're feeding missing data, that's your model or your application becomes unreliable. right? So there lies the answer. So how you monitor your data, the data quality, and then the drifts in the data, that's the key for model training or the model inference. So that's when your whole application becomes reliable. So data engineer plays a key role in getting this data, which we call it as mission ready data, mission learning ready data set, or AI learning ready data set. So they play a key role. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I hear a lot about when I kind of try to stay up on. Um, I've been reading a lot since AI first, and when I say AI, I'm talking about generative AI. I know AI has been around long before OpenAI and all that was out. I know the banking industry used it extensively for in your fraud investigations. Um, I hear this thing called training data. What is training data?
So let me give an example, right? So take a banking products, right? It can be credit card, debit card, or some purchase cards, right? So or any other products, not just related to cards. So there can be thousands of customers facing issues with their credit score, or it can be issues with their loan interest rate, which was promised something and they see finally different thing. So they can complain to their customer care by calling, "Hey, you have promised this, but what I see is different. Hey, my credit score suddenly dipped, so I don't know a reason. So this is inaccurate." So they're complaining about certain products, right? So this can be from history. You can collect this data and train your model to understand when a customer complains about a certain product, who is handling that, right? Which specific team is handling it? We are talking about routing this ticket history automatically, right? When a ticket arrives, which specific team handles it? So we don't have to manually do this. So how this training data helps is you have historical data for 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years. You use that to make your model understand, hey, if this kind of request comes in, this is the team who is handling it. So now in the future, if a similar request or anything of that particular context arrives, your application or your model tells automatically assigns a specific team to handle it, so that there is no manual intervention, because it can be intensive to read the entire customer comment and get your brain around to understand who is going to handle it. So that's going to be challenging if there are more number of requests, and that impacts your customer experience. So training data is key, which we say, or historical data, which will help your model understand how to behave and what to respond. Yeah.
So when I think of training data, I think about the things I read about how OpenAI uh, developed ChatGPT and how we keep seeing like this evolution. You know, it was GPT 2, then it was 3, then it was 3.1. Same thing with Meta with Llama. Like, how does data impact AI innovation? Like, are they just getting more data from better sources, or what? Like how do they keep improving the model all the time?
So, if you see, right, there is an aspect of retraining. Yes, your model will be initially trained with the available data. So, I mean, this concept works even with your general small scale models, not just AI based or, Gen AI based models, right? You have data, you're training the model, and it behaves based on what it saw in the in the history. Now you have more data, and it can vary from what you have already trained. So what you have to do is you have to do the retraining, right? So if you are coming from this DevOps or ML ops background, there is a concept of CI and CD, which is continuous integration and continuous deployment. There is a new buzzword called CT, continuous training, right? So which means as and when you have adequate data to retrain your model, you have the previous model artifacts and you're appending the newly arrived data, which means you're retraining your model to make more appropriate to the current data. So yes, what they do is for all the Gen AI models, you have the Wikipedia data using which you train the model, and then to make it to make it work for your specific use case, you can transfer the learning and you can train it on that specific data, and it works for your use case as well. So that's a concept of transfer of learning, retraining the model. So that's how all these Gen AI models are.
Hey, digital marketers, entrepreneurs, and tech enthusiasts. Ready to elevate your AI game? Check out the AI Powered Marketer newsletter from Keith Bell, host of the AI Powered Marketing Show. The AI Powered Marketer newsletter is your go to resource, packed with actionable insights, cutting edge tools, and the latest news in AI and digital marketing. Whether you're optimizing sales funnels, exploring new AI strategies, or staying ahead of industry trends, this newsletter has you covered. Don't miss out on the chance to supercharge your marketing efforts. Subscribe now. Just click the link in the show notes to sign up today, and remember, the future of marketing is here and it's powered by AI. See you in the newsletter.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, what you're saying here is like, let's take OpenAI again. A lot of their training data probably came from a variety of sources, Wikipedia. I know that they've gotten themselves in a little bit of trouble with some of the data they've pulled in because they're being sued by, I think it's the New York Times and somebody else. But they're also like, they just made a deal, I think it was last year, with Reddit to buy data. So they're constantly feeding. I like to call it feeding the beast, to train it. So, um, so data, like you're saying, it data is the key, and the data you have is that why like the model keeps evolving and keeps growing?
Yep. So as the new data arrives, you retrain the model, and A/B testing, right? There is a term called A/B testing. You have a particular version of model already in production, and you can take your next version to pre-prod, so that you have the flexibility to compare what's this evolved model is doing, or how it is behaving versus what your previous model is doing. So if you know the deviation, you can put this latest model or evolved model into production, so that will be your version of the model that you would use for serving. Yes.
Okay, so it just keeps, as new data came in. Like I remember when ChatGPT came out, it said, okay, you only have knowledge up until this date. Because I can remember when I would use it, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not true. That hasn't happened yet. Well, the reason was because I learned later was that the data was up until like a certain date, and then and now I think they've got it down to where like they're getting almost real time.
Um, there is this concept of RAG, regenerative augmentation generative, right? So it's like you are building a complex search engine. If your model is trained, or your model was trained to certain date, so anything after that your model may not be aware of, right? So you're training your model with certain data, so there is new data that's arriving. How does your model behave, right? So it can create its own response. It's called hallucination. So to avoid that, there is a concept of rag, where you hit a certain source, you get the latest trends, and you pass it on to the model to get the response again with the newly captured data. So that's how even the real-time responses can be captured, even if you didn't train your model with that particular recent data.
Yeah, I want to touch on two things that you talked about there. You talked about hallucinations and RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, if I'm correct there. Explain to my audience what a hallucination is. Like I I know what I think it is, but explain what you think.
Yeah, hallucination is about your model knows certain things, and if your question is about and something it doesn't know, right? So it hallucinates the response, and it can go either ways, right? So which you don't want. You want your model to yeah, it makes it up, it makes up the answer. That's the appropriate way to use. So to avoid that, there is this concept of rag, where you define certain rules saying that, hey, if you find these keywords, or if you're talking about, let's say, weather report, right? So weather report, you go to a specific database, fetch the latest weather report, and respond back. And if they're talking about some sport events, go to a different database or a different segment of your single database and capture the response, and again feed it into the model, so that model will respond back in a proper way that it responds to the question that it's already aware of. So that's the first one is hallucination, and then the second one is RAG, to avoid this hallucination. But still, it can be possible that models still hallucinate even with RAG, but you tend to avoid to some extent.
Yeah, I remember when I first started using it, OpenAI, I was doing an article for one of my customers, and it was on. My customers are in the healthcare background, and it was on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. That's a mouthful. I have no idea what it is, but I had it write this article and ask it to cite sources and authors and speakers, like, so that I had the genuine deal. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna check these. So I went down and I checked the links on the bottom. It completely fabricated them. They were totally made up because it didn't have the data that we now have with like a research tool that you would get in a like a GPT. It didn't have, and so you talked about RAG, and I want to make sure I understand this. So let's say I am a doctor of neurology, okay, and I asked AI to look something up. A RAG, is that a separate database of in and of itself, or is it part of the database?
It doesn't have to be a database. Data, it can be a database, or it can be some API, it can be a file system, it can be any source which helps your model understand something it doesn't know. So it doesn't only have to be a database, but majority of your RAG design would be some kind of a NoSQL which responds with low latency.
Right. So you like maybe using my example, I'm a neurologist, and I ask AI to look something up um, through a RAG, through an API call to WebMD. It goes out and it gets the augmented information, and then it puts it back together, so you get a better response. Is that kind of okay? All right. I want to talk to you about something I did a podcast episode about a year ago, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there was a trending story probably about a year ago with a data drought. The AI was eating up so much data that there was going to be a drought of data. Do you remember seeing anything about that in your background and
No,
your
not really. Data
sphere?
drought. So maybe just if you can give me some
Basically, what they were saying is that these AI models were moving so fast and consuming so much data that the ability to get new data from existing sources was going to run out by 2026. And the reason I asked about that is because I learned about a concept called synthetic data. So, what is synthetic data?
So synthetic data, I mean, it comes to relevance in various different aspects, right? So basically, synthesizing your data where you have you wanted to train your model, and you have PII data. Let's say we are talking about banking data, but you are taking to a system where you don't know whether there can be a data leak. I'm just giving an example or an instance where synthesizing your data will make more more significance. So what generally applications or application owners do is, based on the patterns of your data, they create the synthetic version of your data, and then they can transfer it to the public cloud, where you can train your model and understand certain history of your customers. And then you bring the model artifacts back to your private cloud or your own in on-prem, and then use that for your model inference or serving. So why? Because For model, it's statistical data, right? It's basically doesn't matter whether it's real data or synthesized data. All it, let's say there is a credit card and there is some A's and then some customer identifiable metrics. So whether it's real data or synthesized data doesn't really matter. So we create the data so that your model gets trained without exposing your PII data, personally identifiable data. So that way you are creating model and then you feed the real data, it gives the prediction. So that's one place where you are synthesizing it. Or you're creating certain applications to understand or enhance it. Maybe it's not within your, again, private cloud, you're doing it elsewhere. So using certain regular expressions, you are creating synthetic data and then use that for your enhancements and then train your model, whatnot. So yeah, that's the significance of synthetic data.
So I want to touch on something you talked about. It kind of takes me to my next question. You talked about PI or personal information. Um, you probably are the best person to comment on this because you're governed by the Bank Secrecy Act, and you're so how do banks first of all, do banks have their own AI platforms that they've generated in house, like their own large language
That's
models?
correct. So I mean, most of the banks are little sensitive towards the Gen AI because you don't want to do use anything and everything to serve your customers, and that too when you have PII or the critical data under the hood. So yes, they have their they take the large language model and then they transfer the learning, but they are very cautious about it. And PII data especially, right? You look at tokenizing the data. Again, the same concept that I told earlier. You don't have to feed the actual data to your model. You can tokenize the data and feed the model and train the model, right? Because at the end of the day, it's statistical data that what model looks at, right? So PII being very critical, what you do is you tokenize it and then feed the model, but you still use the same model artifacts for your serving. Yeah.
Right. And most importantly, you're a closed system. Like, I can't come from the outside. Now my background as a criminal investigator, I know that when I wanted to get PI information from a bank, I had to get a court order, to come in and get it. Um, Almost like it kind of I think the one other industry that has the same level of protection is the healthcare industry with protected health information, and their data. So I did an interview last year with a guy by the name of Samuel Hart. Now Samuel Hart worked for the NSA. So the stuff that he created, like there was stuff he couldn't even talk to me about. It was just like, can't talk about that. So, we had a whole set of things that we weren't allowed to talk about. Um, I want to kind of switch to um, regulation. Like, do you see regulation as a positive or a negative for AI and data going forward? It's a very complex issue, I know.
It's a very complex issue, like you rightly said. Uh, any regulation, right? There is a lot of design and maintenance that goes under the hood, right? CCPA, for example, right? So how you store the data, how you retrieve it, or how you delete it, right? Because you can have the customers call us and ask, hey, how are you using our data, right? And you can tell them in what ways you use it, and if they are not satisfied, hey, please, can you get rid of this particular data? You should be in a position to get rid of it, right? So which means you are making your system flexible, which means there is a lot of design going around it to make it to extent where you can simply delete it so that you no longer uses it. And you also have traces where you already used it so that you can wipe it off as well. So the lineage is also very important, which you have to maintain to make sure you are in compliance with all these regulations. Yeah.
Yeah, you probably your industry probably has some of the strictest regulations. Would you?
I agree. GDPR or the CCPA, all these are regulations. But again, that's for the benefit of everyone. It can be the customer or the bank. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I like I said, I've dealt with PHI information from some of my customers. Um, Platforms like Gemini, which is a Google product. I actually have an interview coming up with a data scientist that works for Google in a couple weeks, so I'm going to ask her about this too. They have kind of an advantage because they've got like this huge pool of data set to pull from. You know, um, how are they like protecting like people's privacy?
I may not be able to exactly answer how they handle it internally. That could be their the model internals or their how they handle it. But in general, there is this concept of data anonymization, right? There are open source tools like Presidio where it scans your data, it identifies if there are any critical PII or PHI elements. So they call it as named entity recognition, right? Again, we used AI models for this kind of analysis. So what this data anonymization does is, or the models like Presidio does is, you feed the input, it automatically masks or anonymizes or redacts your data based on your choice, right? So that way, you are protecting the customer's data or the customer's identity, and also you are able to use that data for your training needs. I'm pretty sure they would do something like this, but yeah.
Yeah, so just so my audience understands the concept of data uh, anonymization is used in a lot of different industry besides finance and banking, healthcare. I know the military uses it from my conversations I had with Sam Hart earlier this year. But that's a key component of protecting people's personal information and their personal data. How about VPNs? Like, how do VPNs affect the data collection process? Because I see all these commercials for get this VPN or that VPN. How does that affect data
So
collection?
again, if you're talking about the private networks, right? The way that private networks are designed is it's open only to the intended audience or the intended consumers. So it always basically blocks, there are firewall settings that blocks from any external customer entering into your network, so that you are maintaining the privacy of the application or the data that you're handling. So how it affects the collection, still, if you want to open this particular network for, an API, let's call it as an API. You have a model that basically has an endpoint and you wanted to feed the data to it to get the serving. So you open up the firewall to a specific customer who are intended to consume it, right? So again, it's a handshake where you maintain the privacy from the customer, from the response that you are getting from this model, so that this doesn't go out. So that's how this private networks are helping out. And yes, it can impact data collection, but that's made for a purpose. So yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned APIs. I love APIs, by the way, because they're great because I can create just about anything. If I wanted to make up a sports trivia app, I could connect. I found this wonderful database of APIs and all the different things. But what is it? Just so my audience understand, what does API stand for, and what is it?
So it is application programming interface, right? Am I? I don't know if I am giving the actual textbook definition. It's an endpoint that helps you interact with underlying application. So there are different concepts around it. There is synchronous, asynchronous APIs. Synchronous is basically you hit an API, you get the response back. That's a synchronous. And asynchronous is you hit an API, you may not get the response back. You get the status of, hey, your request has been successfully received, but under the hood you do the processing and then you write the response back to a database or something where your application caller would pull from, right? And why APIs are so popular is the way that you process, right? If you hit an asynchronous API, maybe take again API model serving as an example, AI model serving as an example. You can process it in a distributed way, which is called, you can introduce this concept of multi-threading under the hood, and then you can process it, simultaneously, and you can get the distributed power out of it. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I forget who I interviewed that explained it to me, but an API is almost like it's like you use the term handshake between two different softwares that have their data formatted in two different ways. The API allows them to talk back and forth between each other in a language that they both understand. Is that
Yeah,
kind of what?
that's kind of a textbook definition, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's textbooked, but that's the way it was
Yeah,
explained to me.
that's
So, um, what are some of the future trends? I mean, I know you're in the industry, but what are some of the future trends with data and data engineering and going forward with AI?
So there is this. The future trends is all about this pre-processing or enrichments is always there. Database, different databases of choice like NoSQLs, it's always there. Delta Lake, but the key or the emerging aspect is shifting your focus from near real time to real time in a distributed way. So let's say you have an application, maybe a decision engine or a model serving layer, and you're hitting that model serving layer and you are anticipating some response. How quickly your model is responding back, or how quickly you are able to get the response back, determines whether it's a near real time or real time application. So, take for instance, you wanted to determine whether a transaction is fraudulent or not. And if you take, let's say, even 1 second, that's not enough. That's basically the latency that these kind of applications would anticipate is sub-second or microsecond, right? So that's where this distributed processing, along with the real-time capabilities, makes your AI. I mean, when you are predicting fraudulent transaction, it can be an AI model under the hood, right? It can be already intensive. So how do you parallelize your load and get the inference out of it is what this real time applications is all about. So I would encourage to take a look at applications like, to start with, Apache Spark, and then understand things like structured streaming, and then look at what's the underlying architecture, right? There is something called Lambda architecture, how it works, and then understand applications like Apache Flink, which is made of Kappa architecture, which is real time. There is concept of continuous streaming. So yeah, that's the latest trend in terms of data and AI engineering when it comes to the model serving.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today. I'm going to wrap up here with you. I'm fascinated by data because data drives the decisions that I make as a business person, and same thing for you in the banking industry. It drives the decisions that you make internally. But if somebody wanted to learn more about you, what's the best way to find you?
Again, like you rightly quoted, data is everything. To make your applications more reliable and stable, you have to have perfect data and clean data. That's where data engineers, ML engineers, and the AI engineers plays a key role. And yes, I'm open to help anyone who would like to understand the data trends or how the under the hood AI and ML engineering works. The best way is to reach out through my LinkedIn profile, and then they can connect, and then I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. You've been very inspiring.